Welcome back, criminophiles, to another episode of Homicide Cases. I'm your host, Misfit.
I'm Benjamin Atkins, an American serial killer who took the lives of 11 women.
Forensic Criminology and Urban Pathology, a comprehensive analysis of the Benjamin Atkins spree.
The annals of American serial homicide are often categorized by the psychological profiles of the offenders or the demographic commonalities of the victims. However, the case of Benjamin Atkins, also known as the Highland Park Strangler, demands a more multifaceted analytical framework. Operating within a tightly compressed window of 8 months between December 1991 and August 1992, his actions represent a singular intersection of individual psychopathology, extreme urban decay, and the systemic failure of social and legal institutions. To understand the Atkins spree is to examine the collapse of the industrial Midwest and the specific failures created by the withdrawal of economic infrastructure from predominantly African American urban centers.
Biographical origins and developmental trauma.
The trajectory of Benjamin Atkins is a case study in the cyclical nature of trauma and the failure of protective child welfare systems. Born on August 26, 1968 in Detroit, Michigan, Atkins was the younger of two sons born into an environment of severe substance abuse and domestic instability. His parents were both documented as struggling with drug addiction and alcoholism, a condition that fundamentally impaired the primary caregiving environment from his earliest infancy. The departure of his father shortly after his birth removed any potential for paternal stability, leaving Atkins in a household where the mother, who was a lady of the night to support her addiction, frequently exposed the child to the visceral realities of that commercial trade. The psychological impact of these early exposures cannot be overstated. Criminological analysis suggests that Atkins' later targeting of sex workers was a displacement of the resentment and trauma he felt towards his mother. His mother's eventual abandonment of him in 1970, when he was only 2 years old, led to his placement in the state orphanage system. Rather than providing a corrective environment, the orphanage became a site of further victimization. Atkins reported being physically assaulted by peers and, most critically, being molested by an orphanage employee at the age of 10. These formative experiences of powerlessness and violation are frequently cited in the development of mission-oriented or power-assertive serial offenders who seek to reclaim agency through the victimization of others.
The socioeconomic landscape of Highland Park and Detroit, 1980 through 1992.
To analyze the Atkins spree without considering the economic collapse of Highland Park is to ignore the primary facilitator of his crimes. Highland Park, an enclave within the city of Detroit, was once a thriving industrial hub. However, by the late 1980s, the city was in the throes of a catastrophic downturn. The departure of the automotive industry was the primary catalyst. Ford Motor Company had sold its Highland Park plant in the early 1980s, and the most significant blow came between 1991 and 1993 when Chrysler Corporation moved its world headquarters to Auburn Hills. This move resulted in the dislocation of 6,000 jobs and the loss of nearly 25% of the city's tax base and 50% of its annual budget. The resulting fiscal crisis led to the systemic withdrawal of city services, including a reduction in police manpower and the inability to maintain infrastructure. The physical manifestation of this decline was a landscape of thousands of abandoned structures, houses, apartments, and commercial buildings that became the hunting ground for Benjamin Atkins. The geography of the homicides was focused on a mile-and-a-half stretch of Woodward Avenue, a corridor that had transitioned from a grand thoroughfare to a site of illicit economies. The abundance of derelict properties such as the former Longfellow Nursing Home and the Monterey Hotel provided Atkins with an architectural cloak. These buildings were no longer under active surveillance by property owners or the state, allowing Atkins to lure his victim into kill zones where their cries would not be heard or their bodies would remain undiscovered for months.
Victimology and the mechanics of the spree.
Benjamin Atkins is frequently cited by the FBI as America's fastest serial offender because of the extreme frequency of his homicides. Between December 14, 1991 and August 21, 1992, he took the life of 11 women, a rate of violence that reflects a near total lack of cooling off periods often seen in more controlled serial offenders. Atkins' victim selection was strategic. He targeted women who were invisible to the broader societal gaze, those struggling with addiction, poverty, and the necessity of sex work. By choosing victims from these marginalized groups, Atkins relied on the systemic biases of the era, where the disappearance of a woman from Highland Park was often treated with less urgency than a disappearance from a more affluent suburb.
Chronological reconstruction of the homicides.
The discovery of 3 bodies on February 17, 1992, at the Monterey Hotel was a pivotal moment in the investigation. Each woman was located in a separate room, suggesting that Atkins used the hotel as a semi-permanent site for his predatory activities. This cluster of victims forced law enforcement to acknowledge the presence of a serial offender, leading to the eventual formation of a multi-agency task force.
The survival of Darlene Saunders and the failure of early intervention.
Darlene Saunders, age 35, stands as the only known individual to survive an attack by Atkins during his primary spree. Her encounter in October 1991 followed the typical MO. Atkins lured her into a vacant restaurant on Woodward Avenue under the guise of payment for sex. Once inside, he forced her onto a bed of broken glass and trash and attempted to strangle her. Her survival was the result of physical resistance and the fortuitous appearance of a passerby, which caused Atkins to flee. Despite Saunders' attempt to alert authorities, the institutional response was delayed. She flagged down the police car in March 1992, months after the attack. Even more egregious was an arrest of Atkins in late January 1992 after 4 bodies had already been found in an abandoned building. Because investigators lacked sufficient physical evidence to link him to the specific homicides at the time, he was released, allowing him to kill several more women before his final capture in August. This sequence illustrates the limitations of reactive policing in an environment where forensics and interdepartmental data sharing was not yet integrated.
Investigative breakthrough and forensic evidence.
The apprehension of Benjamin Atkins was ultimately the result of traditional street detective work augmented by new forensic technology. Following his identification by Darlene Saunders during a police ride-along on August 20th, 1992, Atkins was arrested on charges related to her assault. During the subsequent 12-hour interrogation, investigators utilized the psychological profile compiled by the FBI to pressure Atkins into a confession. Atkins initially attempted to deflect suspicion by claiming he was homosexual, a strategy intended to undermine the sexual assault motive presumed by the police. However, once confronted with the specific details of the crime scenes and the profile of a mission-oriented killer fueled by misogyny, Atkins provided a comprehensive confession. He not only admitted to the 11 homicides, but provided specific descriptions of the victim's attire and led police to two more women which had not yet been discovered.
The role of physical evidence in People v. Atkins.
While the confession was substantial, the prosecution's case was bolstered by forensic markers that were becoming increasingly definitive in the early 1990s. The case of People v. Benjamin Atkins, number 176793, highlighted two critical pieces of physical evidence. The trial court's decision to join 12 separate files for a single trial was the subject of legal appeal. The defense argued that this joinder was prejudicial, but the appellate court ruled that the crimes were linked by a distinct criminal signature or modus operandi. Under Michigan Rule of Evidence, MRE 404, subsection B, the court found that even if the cases had been tried separately, evidence of the other crimes would have been admissible to show a common scheme or plan.
Institutional politics and the Paul Lindsay controversy.
The capture of Benjamin Atkins was not without internal conflict within the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Paul Lindsay played a central role in spearheading the investigation and received a $600 incentive award from FBI Director William Sessions for his work on a case in 1992. However, the professional triumph was followed by a contentious legal and bureaucratic battle. Lindsay authored a novel titled Witness to the Truth, which provided a thinly veiled and often accurately critical look at the FBI's internal bureaucracy. The Bureau responded by threatening to terminate Lindsay for insubordination, claiming he violated policy regarding outside income. This backlash highlighted a recurring theme in high-profile serial killer investigations: the tension between the street-level agents who secure captures and the administrative brass who prioritize institutional image and procedure. The controversy surrounding Lindsay's book served as a public airing of the agency's internal fissures during a period when the FBI was attempting to modernize its approach to serial violent crimes.
Scientific evolution. The 2024 identification of the Monterey Jane Doe.
For 32 years, one of the victims found at the Monterey Hotel on February 17, 1992, remained unidentified. She was the third body located in that specific building, alongside Valerie Chalk and Juanita Hardy. This lack of identity served as a haunting reminder of the disposability of Atkinson's targets in the eyes of the early 1990s social structure. In 2024, a significant breakthrough occurred through the use of forensic genealogy. The organization Identifiers International utilized advanced DNA sequencing and genealogical databases searching to finally link the remains to a family tree. Although her identity was confirmed, her family exercised their right to keep her name withheld from the public record. This modern resolution underscores the shift from the paper cases of the 1990s to the technologically driven cold case investigations of the 21st century, ensuring that even the most marginalized victims are eventually recognized.
legal outcome, and the passing of Benjamin Atkins.
The judicial proceedings against Atkins concluded in April 1994. After a 4-month trial and 3 days of jury deliberations, Atkins was found guilty of 22 counts of first-degree homicide and 1 count of first-degree criminal sexual conduct. On May 11, 1994, he was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole. Atkins' life in the Michigan Department of Corrections was brief. He died on September 17, 1997, at the age of 29, at the Charles Igler Reception and Guidance Center in Jackson, Michigan. The cause of death was complications from AIDS. His death at a young age, only 5 years after his arrest, precluded the possibility of lengthy appeals or further revelations regarding potential undiscovered victims.
Criminological profile, the fastest killer in a dying city.
The Benjamin Atkins case is more than a narrative of serial homicide. It is a structural critique of the late 20th century American city. The speed with which Atkins operated was facilitated by a physical and social environment that had essentially given up on the Woodward corridor. The abandonment of thousands of buildings provided the primary tool for his crimes, while the socio-economic desperation of his victims provided the opportunity. In conclusion, the Woodward corridor spree remains a definitive example of how marginalized populations become the primary targets for rapid-fire serial predators. The eventual capture of Atkins required a convergence of eyewitness bravery from Darlene Saunders, focused psychological profiling from the FBI, and the then novel application of DNA technology. The 2024 identification of his final anonymous victim provides a closing chapter to a saga defined by urban tragedy and the slow, often painful progress of forensic justice. The case stands as a warning of the lethal consequences that arise when economic divestment creates dark corners where violence can proliferate unchecked.
That's the story of my short and troubled life as I face my final judgment.
And that concludes another episode of Homicide Cases as I close the file on Benjamin Atkins. Join me next time where I will be opening the file on Joseph Atkins.
Thanks for watching. If this is your kind of content, then please give me a like and follow. It will help me keep this series going. This is Misfit signing off, and as always, stay safe.